So for today, we're going to work on transitioning from our concept map or our cluster map or whatever from our idea to a question that can be answered. So we've kind of hinted about these questions for a while. Like I've asked you to put down the questions and all that, and mostly I've given them to you or let you be a little bit more free flowing in this. But as they say, right, the answer is only as good as the question asked. So the goal here is to ask a specific enough question that we can eliminate as much of the "it depends" as possible and move towards actionable information that we can use clinically with our patients or clients. So we want to create questions that are as much yes or no as possible. I gave you this article on Canvas. It's written more for librarians in nature, but it does a good job of kind of explaining why we have these sorts of questions. And so if you're struggling at all with this idea of why we're doing what we're doing here, this article should help. So the first thing when we talk about questions is we've got to look at this idea of background versus foreground questions. And the real reason for this is because for years and years, as I'm fond of mentioning, we've got you guys doing basic level research where you research about things and bring in the specific facts, right? That we've trained you very well to do that. And most of those are background type questions. Tell me about something. Tell me about this research article. Tell me about the effects of X on Y. Tell me about spiders. Right? Those are background questions that tell us about the context of a specific question or a specific area. We want to move into what we call these foreground questions. Foreground questions are now questions that take what we know and they're going to apply them to a specific situation that's relevant to us. So, for example, we don't want to know whether or not ultrasound works, right? That's how ultrasound works. We want to know whether or not we should use ultrasound on this patient. That's what we want. That's the difference. Not how or why ultrasound works, but will it work for this patient? That's the difference. Okay. So we need the way you really differentiate background versus foreground questions is, can it be answered yes or no? And that's our goal, is to create yes or no questions, right? If we have a patient or a client that we're working with and we're trying to create the best treatment or best program for them, we want to know, is this the best? Is this going to work? That's a yes or no. Not how it might, not whatever. We need yes or no. Well, as I'm also fond of saying, the answer is always it depends. And it depends basically means it depends on how you define the parameters. You take high school debate or any debate, the person that defines the variables wins the debate. Same thing is here. So we need rules for the game. So I'm going to talk about this as a game because for the most part we have athletic backgrounds. And so for a background question would be, how is the game played? But now we want to know which team's going to win. And in order to have a winning team and a losing team, we need rules. So in any competitive game is relatively simple. You need to know who is allowed to play in the game, right? Some sort of aspect with there, like the rules associated with the game. You need two teams, a home team and an away team. And you need some way to define the score, right? That's the basic premise of any game. So in answering questions, we developed this PICO format. And there are various versions of this, as you would read in that article, but PICO is the most common. And so PICO just is the acronym for Patient Population Intervention Comparison or Outcome of Interest. So the patient population now is the who gets to play. Who are the participants that we want in our game? This becomes particularly important when we're trying to answer a question of, will this work for my patient? Because as we've seen when we were critically appraising research, if we change the population that we're doing the research on, we might change the effectiveness of the intervention. That's one of the it depends on, right? Question of, should I tape or brace my ankle? Well, the answer is really, it depends. And it depends on whether or not you've ever sprained your ankle before. If you have, it would probably be helpful. If you haven't, you might as well, spend that 5 minutes, washing your hair or something, because it will prevent you spraining your ankle the same amount. So we need to know the population that we're interested in. The intervention and comparison, we've talked about these before. These are going to be our two teams, right? They're playing. One group will have the intervention, one will be a comparison, but we need to define those. Because for our question, when we were critically appraising, we were looking for what they used. Now we're writing the question. So we need to know, do I want to, going back to Rudy's speed training, do I want to know if this speed training is better than no speed training? Or do I want to know if this speed training is better than what I'm currently doing? Those are two very different questions. And then lastly, and this is what I believe to be most important, but is often most overlooked, and that's the outcome of interest. Oftentimes, research does outcomes based on their ease of measurement. But when you looked back to some of those levels of evidence, right, part of the reason the level 5 evidence was so low for a lot of them was because it was, bench level research, looking at physiological changes. I've yet to meet a patient or client that was very interested in manipulating their physiological responses. Nobody has ever come to me and say, hey, I hurt my knee, and what I would really like to do is increase my fibroblastic activity at my knee. Nobody cares, right? They want to get back to doing whatever they're doing. So that's the outcome of interest within your question. What do you want to be different? And this can be very important in defining that, because for Rudy, just keep going back to Rudy, speed is going to be very different if I'm going to measure speed in a 40-yard dash, or if I'm going to measure speed and like a 5-yard burst. Those are two very different things, and both get called speed, right? And that's, you know, if you ever watch the NFL Combine and all those different things, they talk about, does this guy have track speed or football speed? They're very different. Of course, they measure track speed, but that's what, I mean, that's why the NFL, or in the NFL Combine people, right, they all hire track coaches to work on their running form and whatever to make their 40-yard dash better. Has nothing to do with making them a better football player, but does have something to do with making them more money, right? But those are two very different things. So when you're asking the question, you get to decide, how am I going to define speed? Okay. So when you're coming about and creating your PICO question, and that's what is going to be our next assignment for Friday, is to develop a PICO question. The first thing you need to do then is to think of each of these 4 things. So you've created your concept map, right? And you've said, I'm interested in whatever. That's probably one of the 4 things. Now you need to define the other. So for Rudy, let's just work through what concept did you come up with as far as being most interested, if I can use you as an example?
Sub-maximal speed versus maximum speed.
Okay, so perfect. So he's really interested in looking at, you know, these different training protocols and whether or not we're going to be doing a bunch of sub-maximal training or maximum. And this is a big, you know, high controversy thing on a regular basis, right? And I always get in with coaches and all that, like speed training and conditioning are 2 separate things. That we know. So let's start with which one do you want to, if you were perfect, which one would you say is the home team?
Probably.
All right, maximum speed training. All right, we are on team maximum speed training. Right? And we've already so that is our intervention, maximum speed training. Our comparison group, we can compare maximum speed training to no speed training, but as we usually find out, doing something is better than doing nothing. All right, so let's compare it to sub-maximum. So that's the away team. That's pretty easy. We got our intervention, we got our comparison group. So now let's go to the outcome. What do we want to be different with our clients or our athletes or whoever you want to do this with? In an ideal world.
Okay, so am I looking at this in terms of 2 different people, one running at
So let's assume, okay, let's take a step back there. Why do you want to know this? Okay.
Do I have to always train at a maximum level?
Yep.
Or can I dumb it down
And
focus on the training?
okay, perfect. So where do you want to be faster at? Top end speed. Okay. So for our outcome then, that's where we get there. So now we're going to look at top end speed. That is going to be our outcome. We could pick any outcome we wanted, but we're going to look at top end speed. Right? Basically now looking at no matter how long it takes you to get there, no matter how long you could sustain it, how can you get to your fastest speed? You ever watch, like the NFL or whatever, and they've got Google or AWS or whatever, and they track them and they show their top speed. We're talking about that number, the highest possible. So that's our outcome. We can pick any outcome we want. We're in charge right now, right? Then the last one would be, okay, who? You kind of mentioned you, right? So let's go with, football players, right? Or just anybody. I mean, you can pick whoever, but right now, I'm going to call you a football player, which I know is a bit of a stretch. I mean, mainly because there's no football, right? But we'll go with that. So we got our four things. Football players is our population. Maximum speed training is our intervention. Comparison is submaximum, and our outcome is top end speed. Let's do one more. Who wants to go for it? What concept now are you looking at?
I was looking at training methods to improve throwing velocity.
Okay, training methods to improve throwing velocity. In that one, pretty nice, right? Based on that, we have our one thing, and that's usually the case. In this case, our one thing is the outcome, right? Velocity. So let's work now just down. Who do we want this to be in? Okay, throwing athletes. So we're going to include anybody that throws, right? Now we need our two teams. So who do you think, or what do you want to look at? Because we can't look at everything probably. So let's at least pick it into two general categories. Okay, shoulder strength training, and who are we going to pair them against? Okay, in that case, right, because we can assume that anybody that's throwing is doing something, right? So we can just look at the idea of adding something. So it's not like we're doing nothing, because these throwing athletes throw on a regular basis. So let's just talk about if we add a shoulder strengthening compared to not adding a shoulder strengthening. So we will have more of a true control, but it's easier to do because those individuals are still being active. So now we have throwing athletes, shoulder strengthening, no shoulder strengthening on velocity. Okay? Are there questions on what those four things mean? From there are different types. Most of us are going to be in this therapy section because that's just what our mind normally goes through. If you have different aspects there are different kinds. But it becomes relatively simple. They give some examples. But what becomes most important, and this isn't the easiest to see here, but with most of us, our question then becomes just plugging into this statement like Mad Libs. So in throwing athletes, how does adding shoulder strengthening compared to no added shoulder strengthening affect throwing velocity? That's your PICO question. That's the assignment. So for Rudy, it'd be in football players, how does maximum speed training compared to sub-maximum speed training affect top end speed? That's the question. And so you can see based on that, we have this idea of yes or no, one or the other. This goes, how does, you could replace this with is whatever better, and that's where you get yes or no. But how does is a statistical thing because it is quite possible that not only is it not better, but it is worse. That's why it answers this how does. Right? Because there's really 3 answers, but we're mostly interested in yes or no. But there is the third. Because if it's not better than what we're currently doing, then we probably won't do it. But if it's worse, then we sure as heck ain't going to do it. But it doesn't really matter which one because the answer is no. I think that's pretty much the end. There are some examples. Okay. Then after that, you will write your PICO question. And next week, we will then turn that into search terms.
So is there like a sheet on Canvas that you fill out for this?
Nope, all you gotta do is type in your PICO question for your assignment.
You just want to type this question.
Yep, that's the assignment. Now, the assignment, before class, I was talking a little bit about how we are going to be writing much less per week, but the decision process is more important. So like in this case, you could bust this out in 37 seconds. The question comes is, or not the question because that just gets confusing. The problem would come is you're now picking a question that you're going to be, trying to answer for the next 2 months. So don't do it quickly. Think about it. Make sure you've done some of that research. Make sure nobody else has asked the exact same question and done a systematic review on it. Make sure that there's at least some research out there, but don't get too crazy about that. Just kind of see in general, am I out in left field? We will talk about how the fact that the chance of your exact question being answerable is low. We will have to compromise our question a little bit, and we will talk about that later. But at least make sure that there is something out there about your topic.
We have to do reviews for concept map.
So on Friday, we don't have class again. And we have peer reviews for concept map and PICO question. Now, there really isn't much there to peer review. It's more along the lines of, I want you to look at some other people's and see if you're in the same general area. It's more about you seeing theirs and then comparing it to your own to make sure that you're not lagging behind. It's due, I think the same time we normally do. The PICO questions due Friday at 10:30, and then I think the peer reviews do what, like usually you have it like Sunday or Monday or something. Yes. No. So once you submit the assignment, that's all you need to do. If you're going to change your idea, that's fine. You just kind of go through that same process. You do not need to resubmit it. Other questions or stuff? Cool, so that's all I have. We will continue to probably get class time to be a little shorter and shorter and shorter as I introduce these topics and introduce what we're doing. And that is to then open up this time if you need specific one-on-one guidance during class. You can also, of course, request specific one-on-one guidance outside of class and all that. But I'm not going to make you sit in here and work on it if your mind's not on it or whatever. If you have questions or you want to work on it with me individually during these last parts of class, you are more than welcome. All right, that's it.